the key concept of the class is that the automobile is the first individual modern technology. And of course, there is a module that we will work on that you find under week 1 to define more precisely what a technology is, what an individual technology is, and what are the criteria to identify a modern technology. But in a few words, if we start with the evidence, if we go back to the end of the 19th century, so 1888 is the first automobile ride in the world, not on testing grounds, but an actual ride, and in fact, a substantial one, more than 60 miles. Anybody knows who made that first drive? That historic.
Wasn't it like the Ford brothers? Or no?
Oh, you Americans, right? Yeah. We did everything. We invented pizza. We invented cars. Nope. So let's go back to the basic of guessing. Was it a man or a woman who drove the first car?
Man.
A woman.
Oh.
It was Bertha Benz, the wife of Carl Benz, who was one of the founders of what would later become Mercedes-Benz, the German company, right? She had put her own family's money into the industry of the factory of her husband. And even though their first car, which was a tricycle, had been tested on the grounds of the factory, Carl was skeptical, and she just took not only the car, but also her 2 kids and drove several tens of miles to see some relatives, right? Imagine going out in the world, but especially going out in a world where there are no mechanic shops, and more importantly, there are no gas stations, right? So where do you think she stopped for gas? Because of course she needed gas. The mileage on the first cars was awful, just a few miles per gallon.
This is just a guess, but did she pull over to the side of the road to manually add the gas herself?
No, she didn't have gas tanks. She had to get some. She had to stop to fix the car because she was also familiar with the technology, so she had to fix the brake, the linings of the brakes, for example. There were some problems. The chain, those cars had a chain rather than a belt that needed some adjustment. Ideas about refueling in a world without gas stations.
Did she have to like run it?
Yeah, to start it, but again, at some point you need to put in gas.
What kind of fuel?
So the fuel was benzene. So a more pure formula for what we now know as gasoline. Something intermediate between modern gasoline and what would be purely alcohol. Now, you see, boomers like me had this chemical in their house. Not that I purchased it, my mother did, and American women, American households also had this chemical probably up until 50 or 60 years ago. If you went to a drugstore or a pharmacy, you could buy benzene, which was used as a stain remover. It's a very powerful stain remover. It's also not very good if you breathe it in, but that's how and where she could find fuel for her car. So, as I was saying, if you look at the evidence, what is striking when you look back to the documents, books, articles from the late 19th century, the early 20th century, rather than finding a celebration of the new invention of the automobile, finding people propagating ideas that had to do with the utilitarian function of the automobile. That is to say, look, we now have in our modern era a more efficient way to transport people and goods from point A to point B, right? This is what you might expect. You don't find that at all. You do, but it's not the primary way the car is being discussed and represented. What you find in the documents from the era, the earliest part of the automotive era, and during the class we will look at some of them, fiction and non-fiction, is that the car is a magical thing, is a mystical vessel, that the experience of the car is more important than the function of the car. As far as the function, what's interesting is that in the literature and the media of the period, you find a lot of controversies. You find the enemies of the automobile. You find that the automobile as an invention has friends and foes. And enemies of the automobile, friends of the automobile, is not only a language that was common, but it was an actual recurring theme that was discussed on newspapers, in public forums, in books, etc., which seems to be peculiar. A lot of people thought that the car was not needed, and therefore its utilitarian function was not really strategic. A lot of people thought it was a fad, that it was trending, and it kept trending slowly until 1904 or so, and it wasn't until 1907 and 1908 that you find the Ford Model T being introduced, mass-produced, and therefore the car goes from being the toy of the upper echelon of society, the blood aristocracy, which still existed, and the money aristocracy, which of course was more common on this side of the Atlantic. It went from being a very expensive toy, as expensive as an entire house, to being a product that even the middle class could afford, and later on, even the lower middle class, right? By the 1920s, there were more than 10 million circulating cars in the United States and several million more across the world. So instead of emphasizing the supposedly primary function of the car as an instrument of mobility, the idea is that this is an anthropological shift. This is the beginning of a new era, because the automobile introduces humans to a new dimension in several ways. One is speed. That is to say, the idea is that humanity had never experienced speed the way that it was afforded by the automobile. Now, mind you, that the first cars for the first 20 years, between 1888, this first automobile drive by Bertha Benz, and 1908, when the Model T invades the markets, were not very fast. And in fact, especially at the beginning, they were slower than trains, and in some instances, slower than steamships, right? So why would speed be associated with the automobile rather than the train? Even when trains were faster, more accessible, because a train ticket, albeit expensive, it was still afforded by a large segment of the population. The idea, the concept that you find in the literature of the time, directly or indirectly stated, is that when you're on a train or a steamship, you're being moved by the train. When you're on the automobile, your body, and not your mind, but first and foremost, your nervous system is moving in sync with the car, right? So the car becomes an extension of your body thanks to the physical contact, right? The physical contact being the seat. From the seat, you experience the vibrations. These cars were vibrating a lot. Ask anyone who owns a vintage car, and you find some of them at car shows. For example, Howard Kroplick from Roslyn, who sometimes comes to the Port Jefferson Hill Climb, the last edition was August, has racing cars from 1904 or so, and he can tell you that driving at 50 miles makes you think you're going to die. So through the vibrations, through the smells, because these engines are not able to burn effectively and apply to locomotion all of the benzene, all of the gasoline, and therefore with the smoke you inhale a lot of it. We know that some professional race car drivers, especially those who continued well into their 40s and 50s, suffered, their lungs suffered the consequences of prolonged inhalation of these gases. Think about the past when races could last not only half a day, but more than that, 10 hours, 12 hours, 30 or 40 hours across several days. And throughout that time, you're behind this very powerful, noisy, smelly engine. So the combination of the human body, and it doesn't matter if you're a driver or a rider, through the combination of the human body and its nervous system with the car gets alive. And the humans on the car experience a transformation. They become, in some ways, mechanical, exactly because they're one with the car, right? Think about your own experience if you have a driver's license, if you've tried driving a car. For example, when you steer the car, do you look at the car? No, I hope you don't, right? You know where the car is, and you move the steering wheel accordingly, right? And there are a lot more different kinds of feedback, physical feedback that gets to your body. So the idea was that humanity was entering into the modern era, that is to say, an era that was radically different from the past, through the experience of a level of speed that was unknown in the past, or rather, it could be experienced in a train, but within the closed car of a train, you don't feel the speed in a physical way. You see the landscape moving by quickly, but that's not the same. It's not your body, your full body experiencing the car. And because the connection with the car is physical through the body, nervous through the nerves that receive the stimuli, the feedback from the car, and then becomes mental, the car cannot be conceived as simply a means of transportation to take you from point A to point B, because that would be the rational view of this technology. rather than a true reflection of the experience. When people talk about friends and foes, friends and enemies of the automobile, often the friends talk about the automobile as a cult, as a mystical experience, use religious terms, or even biological terms. The car, the ride, the speed can be defined as intoxicating, inebriating, dizzying, right? There is a vertigo in speed. Or they can talk about it as a bug. You're taken by the bug of speed. They can talk about it as an addiction. Once you've experienced a certain speed, let's say 30 miles per hour, you want more, because 30 miles per hour doesn't do anything to you anymore. It doesn't renew those feelings and those sensations. And therefore, you have, from the beginning of, well, actually from the very beginning, but especially in the earliest part of the 20th century, this fixation with land speed records, right? Trying to prove that a car can go 200 miles, 300 miles, later on 500 or 600 miles, right? And at this point, they're still doing these things. They don't capture the attention of the media and the general population in the same way, right? But speed becomes the trademark, the staple of modern civilization. Anything that is modern is connected to speed. And in fact, even in other areas, when it comes to the media and the news, news has to be delivered quickly to the consumer, to the readers of the newspapers, as quickly as possible. Things in the workplace have to be done quickly. And therefore, one of the common symptoms of the modern workplace is a disease, if you want to call it that way, because it was considered a disease, called neurasthenia, which is in fact something we know and we talk a lot about under another term. What can that be? What is neurasthenia to us today? What's the number one complaint from anyone working today, pretty much? What are your friends who are working, your parents, your
Go for work or
Well, an excessive amount of work was nothing new, right? Even if you go back in time, you can find that, let's say, people in the 17th century or the 18th century working in a factory in England or in France would be working to death, right? 10, 12, sometimes more hours a day, 6 days a week. So overwork was not new. Something else was new, and it was connected to this idea that everything has to be done, whether it's production or office work, quickly.
Is it like productivity?
But no, I want a symptom. Productivity is neutral, right? It's neither positive nor negative.
fatigue?
Close, but fatigue again. You're fatigued even if you spend 12 hours tightening a bolt in a factory. But this is different.
Stress?
Exactly, bingo, stress. So it was called neurasthenia, but it was what we know as stress. And the automobile was studied and talked about, even in the medical field, as a therapeutic instrument. In fact, one of the common suggestions circa 1905 to cure stress was automobile rides at high speed. Automobile rides at high speed were also being recommended as a cure for drug addiction, to replace the high of heroin or cocaine. It was recommended as a therapeutic instrument for breathing issues, tuberculosis, which was common at the time. There were no medications, and commonly the therapy included exposure to pure air. And the idea was that if you're on a car, which would be an open top car, or even if it had a top, there wouldn't be side windows. The windshield in front might be slightly open, half open, or completely open. So you were breathing in a lot of air, which was considered therapeutic for people with tuberculosis. And in fact, altogether, automobiling, going out on an automobile, was classified, again, not as a commercial activity necessarily or primarily, even though that was present, but it was classified as what in terms of physical activity? When you look at books about the body, self-help medical books, or in general, magazines, newspapers talking about people who routinely, regularly go out with an automobile, what label do they give to that activity?
Like for leisure?
It's not just leisure, right? Leisure is, of course, one option, and it was what also was applied to going out on a carriage, which was very common. You would go out on an open carriage to see other people, to be seen by other people in a park, hence Central Park, right, as a place where you congregate, even not just on foot, but even from carriages. But what else? Follow the lead of the idea that it's therapeutic. Follow the lead of the connection with the body, and you get to the label that I'm looking for. Even though, again, it's something you wouldn't apply to going out on an automobile these days. And I'm talking about regular folks. I'm not talking about professional drivers.
Exercise?
Rejuvenating?
Yeah, exercise, sport. It was classified as a sport. You find at the turn of the century lists where sports that are popular in society might include tennis or soccer, depending on the area, horse riding, which of course was very popular, right? There were so many horses in the society of the past. But then you also find automobiling as a sport, because the idea was that to be able to breathe at 30, 40, 50 miles per hour required engagement of your body. And it seems like an exaggeration, but it was a trope that traversed the entire 19th century. For example, you may have heard how some people who objected or were skeptical about trains when in the 1820s or 30s in England, trains had open cars. Some people suggested that if the train became any faster, people would suffocate because they wouldn't be able to capture the air that was passing by, right? So there is this idea that you have to put an effort to be on the car in many different ways. It's psychological, it's nervous, it's physical, right? So again, the key idea of the class is this is the first technology of modernity at an individual level that changes the way you experience reality, changes the way you are seen and perceived. So the automobile becomes a product that scaffolds the public identity of a persona, of a person, right? Which will be the leitmotif of car commercials throughout the 20th century, and sometimes you find it even today. That is to say, again, when you think of a traditional commercial for a car, how do they sell it? Do they sell it saying it's efficient, it's comfortable? Or do they show a family going to the Rio Grande, going to the Grand Canyon, going to some exotic locale and being happy, right? They're selling the lifestyle. They're saying you plus the automobile means a different you, a different life altogether. So the automobile is doing all those things. And again, just a quick addition to this, because you might think even somebody riding a horse in some ways becomes one with the horse. Anyone here doing horse riding? Have you ever tried, even as an amateur? Right? You are one with the horse, right? You're supposed to move in sync, right? However, it is, and there was a vast literature about horses, especially during the 18th and 19th century. Yet the biggest difference is that you can never be one with the horse, right? What's the obstacle? Can I ask you your name also?
Colin.
Colin?
Yeah.
Okay. Based on your experience, what's the biggest obstacle when you're trying to be one with the horse? What's the most difficult thing?
Well, it's like alive, so he can just do whatever he wants without you in control of it.
Right? So is it just a physical thing? Knowing how to steer the horse, so to speak?
Because you could steer it one way, but if it doesn't want to go that way, it's not going to go.
Right? So you have to connect with the animal. And the horse is a difficult, beautiful animal, can be difficult to relate to. You really have to know the psyche of the animal in order to harmonize your experience on top of the animal. With the car, that's more immediate. Okay? So that's the basic idea. Now, let's do an activity. I have some instructions here, but I'll repeat the instructions, the basics. This is just for reference during the group activity. So take one, you have two sides. We'll do the technology map, okay? If there is time, we'll do the other. So take one and pass it around. And I brought blank pages because you'll have to draw a diagram, an XY diagram, and write a few things. So it's easier with a completely blank page. Again, take one will be enough, and pass it around. Just follow me. In fact, close your computers. We don't need computers or phones because we'll be using pens or pencils, whatever you prefer for this. Okay, so this is a tech map. The goal of this activity is to stimulate your reflection on your relationship with various technologies. Doesn't have to be, the car might not get included, okay? Don't force it. Just be true, be honest, be direct. But the idea is that, like the automobile in the past, there might be other technologies these days that are connected to you at a biological level, right? And of course, the obvious example would be your smartphone, right? The way that most people will never be more than a few inches from their phone throughout the day, right? So it's something that goes beyond the function of the technology of the smartphone. But this is a process that starts earlier, okay? So we'll try my best. So the technology map is based on two axes that are associated with this. The y-axis, the vertical, represents love, right? So you are supposed to have 5 levels, right? This will be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 level, 5 being love the most and 0 don't love. And you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for the x-axis, and the x is need. So the first step will be think of 5 technologies that are significant in your life. They don't have to be technologies you own. It could be something you use. And as you find in the instructions, these technologies can be defined in a broad sense. They don't have to be related to mobility. Technology can be your watch, right? Your tablet, your phone, a car, a bicycle. It could be, I don't know, the boiler in your house providing hot water. As we will see, technology in a classical sense is much broader as a concept. Even your shoes are a technology, technical. But for the purpose of this exercise, we'll use common sense, right? Not just mobility and not just hardware. It could be software, right? Your technology for the purpose of this list could be Instagram. Pick 5 technologies. So the first thing would just be a list, and you can put it on your page, on the back of your page. Of course, I should have said, somewhere on your page, make sure to put your first and last name. It doesn't matter which side. So the first thing would be to identify those 5 technologies that are significant in your life, for one reason or the other. And then, when you're done with the list, you try to place them in the diagram. So let me give you just some examples so you can understand, and then you proceed. And again, don't follow exactly my examples. It's just for the purpose, and because these examples are meaningful for me, for myself, okay? So, for sure, in my list, I would put the car, I would put my PCs, I would put my tablet, because to me they're a different category. I would put my bicycle, and what else? Let me think. Yeah, I'll put my phone, my smartphone, okay? So these will be my 5. So I'll start with the car. In terms of need, I, myself, will give the car a 3. I don't need the car. I live in an area where I can walk to the village of Port Jefferson. I can walk to stores and supermarkets. If I need to come here, sometimes I'll take the car, but sometimes I'll just share the car with my wife, who is driving farther west to Hapog or Bethpage or where else? Levittown. Okay? So it's not something that I need in a strategic way. However, my car is, so it's on the 3, but I'll put it up here. So the car for me will be 5 in terms of love, 3 in terms of need. Okay? I love my cars. I've always been in love with the car. I was a kid when I was 4 or 5 when my father took me to a hill climb race on the hills, on the Apennines above my town. Okay? I've had cars that I had tuned, modified by special shops on the island, etc. Okay, so that's the car for me. Of course, what I would recommend, since this should be producing a discussion, after you place on your table your 5 technologies, on the other side of the page, write a few sentences, a few simple, short ideas, right? So, about the car, I could explain why the car is a 3 and a 5, right? If you can express that concept. So, I'll take the next, which is the PC, and I'll put the PC at 5.5 for me. I love computers. I studied BASIC in high school in an afternoon class in 1977 or 78. I build my own computers, and there is no day where I don't use an actual computer, right? And in terms of need and love, I'll put tablets not too far from that. I'll give it a 4/4. Again, something I use to read, to watch videos almost every day. It's not a topmost need, but certainly it's there in my life. Bicycle, it's something I love, but very low in terms of need. It's not like I need. Let me put it more realistically at a 3 and a 1. That would be my bike. So I need my phone. Now, of course, I need my phone. So it's somewhere here, probably I'll have to say on a 5. But I don't love my phone. Where did I put it? Doesn't matter. It's not exact. Right. Frankly, if I need a device for media consumption, I'd rather use a tablet. And the phone with a flurry of notifications, with the idea that I'm always in communication with something, feels overwhelming to me. Okay, so I've come to see it as a necessity that I don't appreciate. So try to do the same. Once you've written your list, place the items on the diagram, add 1 or 2 sentences, at least for some of these items, to explain your feelings. And then I'm going to ask you to form groups and share your diagrams, your reflections, with the rest of the group. But for now, you work individually. Take 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Let's see how much time you need, okay? And if you want to move from one segment to the other, the next step would be to work with 2 other students. I want groups of 3 ideally, no fewer than 3 students, no more than 4. You can move your chairs, you can move around if you don't like the people around you. And you share some of your ideas from this activity. And then, of course, we can also entertain a discussion at the level of the class. Okay, so think love means emotions, how you feel about the technologies, right? So love in a broad sense. You hate something you might need. You might need the subway and hate the subway, right? You might need a car because you're a commuter and there are no buses or trains to come to campus. But it might not be something you love, this car, right? But think both in terms of how useful to you and how you feel about this technology, right? And try to be selective. What are 5 technologies you rely on a regular basis that are part of your life? Of course, call me if you need help, if you have questions that I can come to your place and answer. As I said at the beginning, we're not on Brightspace, but if you go to Brightspace, you will find an announcement with the links to the class wiki. I also sent to everyone who was registered by the end of Monday morning, I sent a message with those links, including I created a tiny URL. The tiny URL is tinyurl.com/Fedi, my last name, Fedi, and 325. So the website is open, no login required. It's made with Notion, and I invite you to experiment with Notion. In fact, if you have an EDU email, they'll give you the first tier of their business plan for free, as long as you have that email. Very interesting knowledge management system, very flexible. That's why I use it. So when you get there, this is the portal, and you have a description of the class, But then the most important section is this one, right? Go to, so lectures and readings, you can go to week 1, and of course you find a list of the topics, but under week 1 you find the class activity we did. We couldn't do the other one, but it's fine. The other one was supposed to show where the car places right now as a consumer item. Because in the 1960s, 20 cents out of every dollar spent in commercial products was committed to the purchase of a car, right? This was the biggest item for the commercial market in the 1960s, the automobile. That's not the case any longer because some people don't have a car and use various shared services. In here you find the presentations that I will be using in other classes, and that will be readings, assigned readings with images and links, and some information, of course, about the film. Every Thursday we will watch some scenes from a film having to do with the theme of the class. We'll start with the original Herbie the Love Bug. And I don't know if you've ever seen it or you've seen modern remakes. There is one with Lindsay Lohan, which is terrible, not her fault. Is the script, but this one is quite interesting, set in San Francisco, where you have a car that is alive and interacts with the driver. Going back to the list of places, there is a section for news and announcements. I've included news that is relevant for us. So every August, there are historic car races in California, in Monterey at the Laguna Seca racetrack, and around the area there are auctions. And to give you a sense of the importance of this phenomenon, this year they, at 4 or 5 different auctions in the area, they sold cars for more than $400 million. Almost 1,000 cars, almost 900 cars, vintage cars. This was the most expensive this year. A 1963 Ferrari 250 California sold for $25 million. But I've included other examples of cars sold. The most interesting in my mind is this one, an 1898 French car that participated in a race from Paris to Amsterdam and back. The race took 7 days. But they would stop every day. They would go for 150 miles or so. It was 33 hours of race. And this is one of the first cars to debut a steering wheel, right? And it's mostly original, etc. I'll talk about the Concorso d'Eleganza. This is the 3rd time for me organizing a car show at Stony Brook on September 7th. And if you want to come and see the cars, talk to the car owners, fine. If you want to help you, if you want to volunteer, I'm offering extra credit, up to 3 points added to the final grade, depending on how many hours or what skills you have to bring to the table for this car show. And of course, I have a calendar where you find for every week office hours on Zoom and in the office and classes, and the syllabus. Let me show you briefly the great components for the syllabus. Maybe I should zoom in. Okay. Is it readable from the back? Sure. So 18% is attendance and participation. Participation includes the notes from various activities, or when we watch the films, after the film, I'll ask you to write a few reflections. 12% is for assignments. The assignments will be done on Google Docs files that I'll create by the end of the week. And of course, I'll explain. Just 4 of them, 300 to 500 words. And then there is a project associated with the presentation. So you present on one of the documents of the project. We worked on documents from that period, primary sources. The project has its own page with which includes a full example of a work, and there are two exams, a midterm and a final. The midterm is on October 16th, the final is December 16th. Each one is based on 2 essay questions. You get more than 2 to choose from, and you answer 2 of those essay questions that have to do with the readings or the films. The films in a broad sense, the themes of the films, right? Not the cinematic analysis, the editing, the lights, the photography, etc. Okay? So these are the basics, and it's 318. Any quick question before I let you go?